Tom! Tom! Where are you, son?
Dear Father, forgive me. I only left to search for the better. For you, my siblings, and dear mother. What I heard from my friends who visited the Muslims' lands makes it the land of dreams and the refuge for the poor. What I want most is to get rid of the memory of poverty and misery that choke us everywhere here. Don't be sad, Father. I will be back as soon as I find a way to life.
His injury is deep, and the bleeding won't stop. It is urgent to get Master Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi's help.
My sons, it's important for those who want to work in surgery to have knowledge of anatomy, as described by Galen and what al-Razi introduced, so they can understand the function of each organ and its description. That's why Hippocrates said that there are a lot of physicians, but only in name and not in action, especially in the field of surgery.
Dr. Abu al-Qasim,
How are you doing?
we have received a dangerously injured young man. His situation is critical. Could you please check him yourself?
His injury is rather serious. Most probably he's been bleeding for hours. We should perform an urgent surgery while the sun is high. Clean him. Change his clothes, then bring him to the surgery room.
Dear Father, I have not written to you since I left, but I am fine despite the arrow that hit me on my way here. Do not worry, I was lucky to be treated in a hospital that is comparable to the most pompous palaces of European kings. Clean beds, snow-white sheets. The patients here don't want to get well and leave, as we are presented with the most delicious meals, and whoever needs permanent medicine can get it from the hospital's apothecary. When I get well, I will receive new clothes and 5 gold coins, in order not to be forced to seek another job immediately after leaving the hospital.
With the dawn of the 4th century AH, rich Andalusia oases were cheerfully decorated, greeting the emergence of the scientist who would awaken medicine from its long sleep. wiped the dust of ignorance that covered the arts of medication for long and opened new wide horizons for the humanity by unveiling new secrets of humanity. He is the Andalusian physician and surgeon, al-Qasim al-Zahrawi.
Culturally, Andalusia was distinguished from other countries, for the Arabs entered it as conquerors in all fields, culturally and intellectually, and when they founded Cordoba, it was comparable with Baghdad scientifically in all fields.
Cordoba is an ancient, prosperous Spanish city. It was one of the greatest capitals in the West, characterized by its Oriental Andalusian feature in the 10th century.
Cordoba at that time was one of the major cities around the Mediterranean and the Middle East. It was much better than more further north in Europe, where there were still medieval ages and there were dark ages, not very much sciences was produced.
When the Caliph al-Nasir came to power in Cordoba, he was a great philosopher and historian whose library contained 400,000 books.
In addition, the University of Cordoba had many publications that reached 250,000 books.
Education was available and free, for the authorities expended much on education at that time.
Thus, there is no wonder in finding that the greatest physicians, logicians, the beginning of philosophy, and many important things we are proud of date back to the 4th century AH. Then, at that time, a very small translation movement emerged.
Abdul Rahman al-Nasir was able to expend large amounts of money on the translation of some famous European writings to provide those who wish to excel in these sciences, as he believed whoever can excel in them would be the mirror of this Andalusian civilization.
جادك الغيث إذا الغيث هماها يا زمان الوصل بالأندلس.
In this civilized atmosphere of Andalusia, al-Qasim al-Zahrawi was born in 325 AH in Zahra city. His father was highly concerned with his education and culture.
al-Zahrawi, we know that he is associated with Madinat al-Zahra, that city founded by the Caliph Abdul Rahman III al-Nasir li-Dinillah.
He was attributed to it, which is why he was called al-Zahrawi, referring to Zahra city, and every scientist from this city was called Zahrawi.
He has another attribution, that is al-Ansari, because his family belonged to the Arab Ansar, who arrived in Andalusia and settled there at the early time of the conquest.
It is enough for you, my sons, to contemplate the words of Allah Almighty. And in yourselves, then will you not see? Allah chose ourselves in those verses to refer to His infinite power and great creation, as the creation of man remains the greatest secret of the universe, as well as being the most complicated and expressive of Allah's power.
The young boy's eyes opened to the Creator's verses. Yet he was not fully convinced by the interpretation of his sheikh. Neither did he stop where his wise father's dreams for him were. Rather, he insisted on disclosing the unknown of the depth of the human soul, Allah's great secret. If Zahra, the city where he was born, is not big enough for his dreams, his thirsty for knowledge soul was ready enough to depart for Cordoba, which was full of schools, and its libraries were full of masterpiece scripts, especially in the field of medicine.
al-Zahrawi
Al-Zahrawi lived in the Islamic Golden Age, which is why he accomplished his study by reading the ancient medicine encyclopedias and all the books that were available at that time. This was his starting point of innovation.
ومن هنا أبدع الزهراوي.
We have to say that the name of Hippocrates, this is the 5th century, and a Galen of Pergamum, who lived from 129 to 216 AD, these texts form the basic for al-Zahrawi and his ideas about surgery.
All those whom he read for, starting from Galen, Dioscorus, Hippocrates, Ibn Juljul, al-Razi, and Avicenna, were considered his teachers. They taught him indirectly.
He studied almost everything, starting from dentistry to pharmacy, too many things that cannot be briefed now.
وصل الزهراوي
Al-Zahrawi reached a point of knowledge that enabled him to criticize ancient sciences from the time of the Greeks and Latins.
We can say that his first school was reading.
In my opinion, Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi, referred to worldwide as the father of surgeons, reached this position by two means. The first one was continuously practicing, and the second was his persistence. He was not hasty, yet persistent enough to try for the second and third times.
Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi was not a physician, on the theoretical level only, as we find many physicians, especially the Arabs, who wrote about medicine yet never practiced it. Al-Zahrawi was not of that sort.
That is why al-Zahrawi wanted his study of medicine to be based on principles and methodology.
He gained high experience in medicine thanks to the experiment and observation techniques and recording the results of these experiments to build his theories.
In addition to his interaction with different classes of people at that time who suffered from huge health deterioration because of the lack of professionals.
He expressed his sorrow as he found physicians who had no knowledge about medicine, performing surgeries that led to the death of the patients.
He found serious insufficiency in the practice of medicine at that time, as there was a shortage in the understanding of human anatomy.
He believed that the real science that led to recovery was to study anatomy, as most physicians were content to describe the disease and the treatment only, avoiding performing surgeries fearing the death of the patients.
The surgeons who preceded him considered, for example, tracheostomy as a dangerous surgery. No one would agree to do it. Why? Because they didn't have any clear idea about the anatomy of the trachea. So, by studying it and learning how the trachea worked, etc., he found a new way to make an opening in it when there was a blockage in breathing, without any difficulty. The principle is that if you know the anatomy, you will be able to treat all patients, and this applies to every part of the human body: nose, ears, eyes, bones. In obstetrics and gynecology, he spent his life practicing and experimenting and was keenly interested in anatomy. Till now, we can say whoever does not excel in anatomy can never be a good surgeon.
Al-Qasim al-Zahrawi had a special way in research and experimenting. His interest in anatomizing the human body helped him learn about the organs of the human body, their functions and how they were connected, which would later on result in him having unprecedented courage to perform surgeries at that time.
Surgery there at that time was a very brutal thing. It was something that you would do as a last resource because, of course, there was no anesthesia and there were lots of complications, mainly due to infections and bleedings.
Back at that time, a bleeding patient was a dead patient. Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi was the first to introduce the technique of ligaturing blood vessels to stop bleeding.
He made cords from animal and cat's intestines to tie off the major artery so the bleeding would not affect the surgeries.
Later, this was called catgut. What is catgut? It was a cord made from the cat's intestines. Its distinctive feature is that it can be absorbed easily, so there's no need to cut it off by scissors. Rather, it's absorbed by the normal body tissues. Of course, he also invented the needle for these cords. His interest in surgery was what urged him later to invent new surgical instruments according to the diseases he encountered and the anatomy he studied. This man invented 200 surgical instruments.
One of his main contributions in surgery, and I think most important one, is interest for surgical instruments. The important part of this is that he showed how to make them in different metals, the design of them. He developed own instruments and also how to use his own instruments in different surgical procedures.
In fact, he was a genius inventor in his field, and many of the instruments al-Zahrawi used at that time do not differ from those used today.
Talking about some of the instruments he invented, we can mention the forceps to break down stones. This one's important. He mainly invented it to enter the bladder, grasp the stone and break it to be able to extract it. This technique is used till now. It's called lithotripsy.
So in the area of gynecology and obstetrics, we know that al-Zahrawi invented forceps, so basically pliers, to extract a dead fetus, to cut up that fetus and extract it. That's a major problem, obviously, if you have a stillbirth and the fetus dies and it's not born naturally, it's not ejected from the womb, that leads to the woman's death.
He also used other instruments, including clamps and scalpels.
He invented the syringes. Can you imagine? It was called al-Zakana at that time. He invented two types of syringes, the normal ones we know as injecting medicine, and the anal injections.
In addition, he used many types of saws during orthopedic surgeries. He also sterilized these tools with a substance called as-Safran, the yellow.
The surgical instruments Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi invented were considered one of the many breakthroughs he made in the field of surgery. They enabled him to cure diseases that were considered terminal before.
Adding to that, he did not stop at that point, but rather studied the composition of drugs, both single and combination medicines.
You cannot perform a successful surgery unless there are ointments, pastes, syrups, and many things to bandage the wound and protect it from festering. The doctor's comprehensive philosophical study required him to have a certain knowledge of chemistry and botany.
So he started to get interested in pharmaceutics.
Dr. al-Qasim al-Zahrawi's contribution to pharmaceutics did not stop only at his accurate knowledge of botany and herbs, but surpassed it by creating a way to make drugs through pouring them into molds of prominently decorated ebony, so that the drugs' names would be engraved on the surface of the discs after being extracted from the mold, facilitating the task of monitoring them and forming the basics of the process of drug industry in the world.
Al-Zahrawi was interested in pharmacology. However, he excelled in dentistry, taking a deep interest in dental treatment and implantation. He took parts of cows' bones, making teeth out of them.
But what made him unique was orthodontics, which is now part of cosmetics used in the late 20th century.
He was interested in many fields, saving doctors so much time inventing the tools and methods he used. We owe a lot to Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi in modern surgery. That's why he's rightfully called the father of surgeons. Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi cared about training, innovation, quality, and later writing. After spending tens of years in training, he started writing down this science in a very famous book called al-Tasrif, The Method of Medicine. I wrote this book for you, exclusively for your use, giving it to no one else. It has great knowledge and benefit, and I called it al-Tasrif, the method of medicine, to be at every surgeon's disposal, as he will always need it, finding in it whatever is required. In addition to what I tried and experimented for 60 years.
That is a medical encyclopedia in 30 books, from starting with the general principles in book 1 to the 30th book, the most famous book, on surgery.
Then he devoted several chapters to each type of medicine: ophthalmology, gynecology, dentistry, orthopedics. He did not miss a single detail in medicine or surgery.
He tackled diseases that spread worldwide at his time. He described them accurately, their symptoms, then their treatment in full detail. One of the diseases he clearly described is cancer, especially eye and kidney cancer.
That is why this book was considered a guide and reference for those who succeeded him, especially as it was translated into several languages.
This book, which is extraordinary, 1,500 pages, later it was translated into Hebrew and Latin, and from there on to European languages such as French, German, and English.
Al-Zahrawi, as is the case with many of geniuses, was never appreciated before his death. It is sorry to say that the West benefited from him while his people did not.
Al-Zahrawi did not care much about fame, so he wasn't known at his time. And Muslim and Arab historians started referring to him after a century from his death. During the Islamic civilization, science and knowledge prospered, whereas Europe was living in dark ages. As the Church prohibited medicine and surgery and antagonized scientists. However, Italian students smuggled al-Zahrawi's book to different places in Europe. Being translated into many languages, al-Zahrawi's encyclopedia, al-Tasrif, became the first medical reference in Europe for about 6 centuries. The rest of his writings are now much appreciated on the shelves of their most elite medical libraries.
The Arab and Islamic world had produced the knowledge and sciences that guided many of European generations. It is to say, all the knowledge and sciences that reached Europe coming from the East had a great influence on Western Europe.
Al-Zahrawi is the leader of the Arabic medicine. This scientific persistent soul that wanted to discover the unknown of medicine and to transform the medical unknown to clear information is the soul of experiment, methodology, innovation. It is the soul of Arab brilliance.